So I'm going to come over and I'm going to jump into the presentation and talk about math a little bit. We started off the workshop by saying, you know, we're coming into some really beautiful weather. It's going to be hard to keep the kids engaged. You want your lessons to be a little bit more creative, interactive, both for the kids and you. So that's the drive behind what we talk about now in this bank of activities, lessons, tasks for ELA and math. Looking at these moments to supplement virtual school as we move through weeks, or in the upcoming weeks, 9 through 13, getting us to the end, looking at substitution opportunities, ways that you can mix it up a little bit, and then hopefully with an idea of using some of this in the future when we get back, okay? So keeping that in mind and coming from really a PBL perspective, I started thinking about ways that we can use the features of Google Slides and backgrounds to create some creative math tasks. So here's one. We know that in Union City, the mayor is very big on creating these parks in the most ingenious ways throughout the city, in the tiniest lots, and you know, they're all over the place to try to make really good, enjoyable moments for our kids in an urban setting, right? So kind of a take on that. All I did was create this initial slide, start presenting the scenario where the mayor, instead of going to his normal bank of architects, he's asking for students to submit competitive plans instead, start giving some math conditions. In this case, the lot size, 40,000 feet by 20,000 feet. So I'm starting to gear up towards, as you can tell, some area, some perimeter work, measurement, capacity, dimensions, all of this kind of math areas and standards are starting to gear up. And what I'm going to do is ask them to submit a floor plan of what their park would look like. So I start layering in some math conditions, right? 50% of the entire surface or the grass area needs to be covered by patio bricks, some addition non-negotiables of what it must have. I start adding in budget concerns, and 40% of the budget should be dedicated to this, 30% to this, 10 to this, however you design it. Giving some smaller dimensions to patio bricks, giving a collection of pricing on the side, so I can do a lot with algebra and equation, and talking about how I'm using algebra to obtain total prices or individual prices for collections of things, right? So you just start layering in math, and I'm sure the math people in the group are thinking of a ton of different, much more in-depth conditions that would layer on top. But just to give you a feel for it, that the kids are going to create something based on your set of design and more than that, math conditions. So where are they going to do this? What are they going to do? So I have then created this format for them. And all I did was take a Google slide, very simply, color changed to green, added some fencing and shrubbery clip art along the bottom. I did a little gate very quickly, but this now becomes the background of that slide. So I took a screenshot. Once I created it, I took a screenshot and pushed the whole thing into the background of this slide. So kids are going to use this and layer on top of it based on the math conditions that I gave them. And I also give them a collection of clip art. And this isn't meant to be exhaustive by any shape, and nor did I chunk these together. These were random selection of items that you would normally find in a park or a backyard. And because I showed you before, I had to change the coloring and size and orientation of the clip art, you can easily do this, maybe by choosing one or two variations, but just changing the color and the orientation so they look and feel a little differently. So giving them the math conditions and the scenario and giving them all the clip art to choose, then they're off to create their own version. So here's what I did as a sample. it was very therapeutic. I keep saying this as I go through these lessons and these workshops, that it allowed me to be a little bit creative and designing. Obviously, I didn't adhere by any means to my own conditions, but this is just to give you a visual of what it would look like. But kids will come up with amazing design elements. And you can simply add an additional slide where they are showing and explaining all of the math behind their design. You can take it a step further, and you can have competitions within your classroom of which design would win the proposal, requested by the mayor. All sorts of things you can do here, but just a way to mix in some number sense, possibly, and some measurements and algebraic thinking into a PBL that might support some of the math that you have coming up, or if you want to take a little bit of a brain break from some of the heavy duty math you're doing and just give some sort of PBL like this, allows the kids to have a little creativity but still remaining in the math world. And the same thing in the same venue, I started thinking about other ways you can do things that are similar. So maybe, for example, you are commissioned by the New York City Aquarium in Coney Island. They want you to design a tropical fish tank, or maybe this can be a fish tank in your home. Give them some math conditions, layer it out for them and what they have to do. Give them a collection of tropical fish, and all I did, and sea anemones and seaweeds and rocks, and together can put together their own design or scene. This is something I came up with. You notice that I used some of the same clip art, but changed the color and the size and the orientation. The rocks are layered in front of one another, so I go back to that technique of how to play with the clip art a little bit. And you can do a whole bunch of math in certain tropical fish are much more expensive than others, and you can layer in pricing with this and sort of look at the percent of how much the tank should be devoted to different kinds of sea life because of the ecosystem requirements and predator-prey relationships. All of that can come into something like this as well, but you can layer in the math and allow the kids some choice in design. And the same thing here too. All I did was took a clip art of a room, pushed it into the background, same concept, give them a whole bunch of stuff to fill the room, and then let them go based on the math conditions. This is my version of it. And I've also been saying, you can tell that I've been watching, in addition to Netflix binging, I've been watching a whole bunch of HGTV shows, DIY, the Cooking Channel, Insane Pools, all this kind of home improvement, kind of creative things, which is probably influencing these activities. So, but you notice too that I played with the color and the design. You can do a lot here as well, beyond just budgeting and algebra. You can do a lot of tiling and perimeter and area work and measurement and all of those things combined. And then I started thinking, well, what about this scenario where you're hired as a general contractor, and this customer wants to resurface the front of their home? Same thing. I give them a couple of quick tools, some brick or stone work, what I'm calling a piece of wood, and what I'm classifying as a brick. And then kids can cover over this because I pushed that entire front image of the home into the background, and then kids can layer on top. And that can be all sorts of conditions here mathematically, what the customer wants and likes, and then you can have a competition there and see which facade works the best. Even with food, and here comes the Cooking Network influence and baker challenges, which I love. So all I did here was took a background drop of a bakery, pushed it into the background after layering on top of it a clip art of a cake stand. I went into shapes, like the shapes I used for highlighting, put them on top of by using the pull to the background feature. And I layered and created this cake, and then took a screenshot, pushed the whole thing into the background. And now I can give kids some geometry, some shapes, some measurement. You can even mix in, if they're decorating, how long it would take to create. So you can do some time intervals and things like that, and push in and have them, based on a set of math criteria, design their own cake. This happens to be the cake I designed. Again, moving forward, if you want to get really, really heavy in the math and just stick to some of the tools and practices you're used to in the classroom, I can use a balance scale right here. Found that clip art, took that orange header, pushed that whole scene into the background, and I can have kids with these particular shapes, which are the algebra blocks, show some balancing of equations, right? So they could show the modeled math of that equation on the left, and then on the right, they could solve and show and explain the solution process. Same thing for an equation mat, right? This could be a nightmare if I gave this to kids in Word. That equal sign and those lines would move all over the place. But if I set it up one time, take a screenshot, push it into the backdrop, and have kids use those same tools, I could have them do stuff like this and model out simple one-step equations in this particular case, right? And show the modeling, which we're pushing very largely. It's heavy on the NJSLA, and it's also what we're pushing in Conquer Math. So this idea of working with virtual manipulatives in activities can work as well. And hopefully those of you in math can start seeing that, you know, it doesn't have to be the balance scale. It could be a coordinate grid. So you can do a whole bunch of work with slopes and transformations and coordinate grid work. And you can do a whole bunch of things, right? If you push what you want to not move into the background. So those are just some quick ideas for using some of those tips and tricks in math.